The views and opinions of the guests of Veterans Archives do not reflect the views and opinions of Veterans Archives, its subsidiaries, or its partners. Hello and welcome to Veterans Archives. This is a podcast where you can learn about our military history in the words and voices of the men and women who lived and created it. I'm your host, Bill Krieger, and let's listen to our next story.
Today is October 3rd, 2023. We are with Larry Gulick in Howell, Michigan. How are you doing today, Larry?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Awesome. So you served in the United States Marine Corps, correct?
That is correct.
And about how many years?
21 years.
Oh, that's a lot. Thank you for your service. So let's talk about where you're from.
I grew up in Clare, Michigan, a small town up kind of central Michigan area. Lived there my entire life until I left for the Marine Corps in 1989.
Okay, so Clare, Michigan, that's northern Michigan. How many siblings did you have?
So I have 3 sisters and a brother. The one sister and one brother are older, so they weren't at home when I was growing up. I don't really remember them at home growing up, but yeah.
Okay. And were you pretty close with the ones who were at home?
Yeah, very
pretty
close
competitive
to my 2 sisters. I was the youngest though, so I was abused by my sisters because I was the youngest. I shouldn't say abused. Yeah. They always kept me on my toes.
Sometimes I was a younger brother, so sometimes growing up, they make all the mistakes that you can learn from, or learn how to manipulate your parents.
I felt like by the time I was older, and maybe it was because I was a boy and they were girls, my parents were just wore out, and I just got away with more because, they had already dealt with raising my sisters and all the troubles that they had. So, yeah. And then when I was a teenager, I felt like I got away with more just because of that. So
that's a good way to do it too. So your parents, what did your parents do for a living? Like when you were growing up?
So my mother was an X-ray technician at the Clare Hospital, and then my father was a truck driver. So most of my youth, I remember him working at a place called Rock Creek Transit Mix. So he drove truck around Michigan.
Okay. Did he serve in the military, your mom or dad?
My mom did not. My dad actually served a few years in the Army National Guard in Michigan. So
okay. Do you remember what unit he was in?
I do not. I just remember him telling stories of doing maneuvers up at Camp Grayling.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I remember him saying that he made private a few times. So then he decided to get out after whenever his enlistment was done.
Okay. So would you consider him a driving force for you joining the military?
I don't know if I would say he was a driving force for me joining the military. I didn't join the military because he had been in the National Guard. I joined the military because, I don't know. I didn't want to go to college at that time. I wanted to, an adventure. And so I was looking for something, and the military just seemed like what I wanted to do. My parents were supportive of whatever I wanted to do. I grew up, with parents that were there. It was funny because my dad worked days and my mom worked eves, so that they tried to work off schedule to each other so that there was always a parent at home and, there for us kids growing up. So, so I think they just supported whatever I decided to do, or whatever my sisters decided to do. Okay.
Now, did you play any sports when you were growing up?
Played a lot of baseball, Little League baseball, and then I wrestled a year. I did play football a year, but then really once I got into high school, I got a job, and I didn't really play any high school sports. I just had a part-time job that I did in the evening. So,
what did you do for your part-time job?
I worked at a little restaurant place for a few years, starting at 14, and then I started working at the local grocery store for a few years until I left to join the Marine Corps.
Okay. So when you, how did it happen? Did you go around to all the branches? Did you know you wanted to do the Marine Corps, or how did the?
Yep. So the one thing I wanted to do was be a cop or an MP, right?
Okay.
So I started going to all the branches. The first time I actually went to the MEP station was for the Army, and it just didn't work out. I had to be 19 to be an MP at the time, and I was still 17 when I signed delayed entry, and I planned on going to boot camp when I was 18. I wouldn't be old enough. And then I went and talked to the Navy. They wanted me to go in the nuclear program, and I'm like, I don't want to sit in the bottom of a ship or a submarine somewhere and never see daylight. And then the Marine Corps said, well, MPs are closed, but we can do 0311, which is infantry, with a security force option, which they made it sound like it was just like being an MP. Later, after you join the Marine Corps and see what they do, you realize that was kind of a stretch. But at the time, it sounded like what I wanted to do, and so I signed up as an 0311 with security force option, which I never did a day in my life. So boot camp things changed. So.
Mm-hmm. So you said you went to MEPS. Did you go to Lansing or Troy MEPS?
The first time I went to, I'm trying to think. I think I went the first time to Detroit because it was consolidated. And then the second time, then when I went for the Marine Corps, a few months later, they had then separated it. And like everybody in southeastern Michigan went to Detroit. Everybody in the rest of Michigan went to Lansing, if I remember right.
Okay. So what year was it so you went to MEPS, you went through the physical, and you took the ASFAB and all of that? What year was it, and do you remember the day you signed your contract? So
it was, I don't remember the exact day, but it was January of 1989 is when I signed my contract and was on delayed entry. So I probably was going to MEPS the end of 88, beginning of 89 timeframe. Okay.
So when you joined, how did it feel? Did you have any feelings come over?
I was excited, right? I had wanted to join the military, was now enlisted in the military, and was on delayed entry and wanted to be a cop, and now got this opportunity to do this thing that I thought was going to be like being a cop, and I was generally excited. I was ready to go. I say I was ready to go, but I wasn't one that was like, okay, I signed up today, I'm shipping tomorrow, right? I actually spent 11 months on delayed entry program.
Okay. So 11 months on delayed entry. So that puts you about November you shipped?
Yep. November 7th.
November 7th. Yep. And where did you ship to?
San Diego.
San Diego.
MCRD San Diego.
So it was cold here and probably warm there, right?
Yes. Yep. I just remember, I think it was Mount Pleasant, Michigan is where the recruiting station is. And I just remember getting on the bus, my mom dropping me off to the bus in Mount Pleasant, and got on the bus and, headed from there and went to the MEP station for whatever they do that last day, and then on a plane to California.
And then, so you're on that, is that your first time on a plane or?
Yeah. Yes.
It's your first time. That's pretty common. So you get on the plane, first time flying, then you arrive in San Diego, and what is your first impression when you meet your drill sergeant?
Well, I mean, so you don't meet your official drill sergeants when you get to MCRD San Diego, the recruit depot. You first are in like a holding company or forming company. But I can tell you, as the bus pulls up and the drill instructor that's in charge of that gets on the bus and starts screaming at you, and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And then you immediately get off the bus, get on the yellow footprints, and then it just goes from there, your head's shaved, everything you have with you is taken from you, and you're given new clothes to include underwear and t-shirts and socks. And, you realize that your world is definitely changing.
So you get there, and Marine Corps basic training is 12 weeks. Is that
12 weeks? Yeah.
12 weeks.
Yep.
And do you remember your drill sergeant's name?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't.
So tell me about some of the training you did. Like,
recruit training. Marching, exercise, and so one of the funny things in recruit training for me was I've always been a good test taker, right? So, there were, especially near the end of boot camp, I remember you have to do all that final testing, like on different subjects. Marine Corps is big on history and customs and courtesy, but there's also like all the other stuff you have to learn, medical stuff or first aid and all those other things you have to learn. And the Marine Corps is big on those. So I spent a lot of time on fire watch in the barracks. With some other recruits, helping them study so that they could be proficient to pass the test. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of neat. It was a different experience, but yeah, I've always had a fortunate of being a good test taker. So,
well, you have on a team you have everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. So your strength was that. So added to the team, you might have had somebody who's good at physical fitness, or whatever else. But yeah, it just makes up the team, So you get done with basic training. What year was it that you completed basic training?
I want to go back one more thing about basic training. I'm sorry to derail.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But in basic training, I enlisted as 0311 Security Forces. In basic training, I did special screening, and they had me take a bunch of weird tests, and they're like, hey, you scored well enough on this test, you want to do this other thing. And there was a couple different options. One of them was a Camp David guard, and one of them was signals intelligence, right? So signals intelligence communicator. So that's what I ended up doing. As I said, I enlisted originally as 0311, but I never spent a day doing 0311. In boot camp, I changed my MOS to be a signals intelligence.
So you do the 12 weeks, and then you go to signals intelligence course?
The first thing you do is, in the Marine Corps, you go to Marine combat training. So every Marine's a rifleman. So you go on boot leave for 10 days, and then you go back out to Camp Pendleton to the School of Infantry on Santa Onofre and Camp Pendleton, and then you do a month Marine combat training. It's not a full infantry training, but it's just kind of a basic one that every Marine goes through.
Okay. So you go through that, and then how long is your signal training?
So that was in signals intelligence training was in Pensacola, Florida. And I'm trying to think of how long that was. You get there, you got to wait for class to form up. You had to be able to type a certain proficiency. Luckily, I took typing in high school, so I was able to test out of the typing school. But some people had to actually go and learn how to type and be proficient in that. I don't remember how long that school was. It wasn't maybe a month, maybe a month and a half. It wasn't that long. So far, your two places for the Marine Corps were in warm weather environments. So yeah, definitely. Pensacola, Florida is actually a favorite place of mine. So
okay, yeah, well, good. So you go to your school, you get MOS qualified, and what comes after that?
So as you're getting ready to graduate, you have to list your. They have options of the different duty stations. I wrote down some options. Anyways, I ended up going to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So that was my first duty station. I was Company L, Marine Cryptologic Support Battalion. So, late spring of 1990, I headed to Cuba.
Okay. So I've actually been there myself. I was there in 2003.
Okay.
For Camp Delta, which obviously wasn't there then, but they have like what was the bar there that was on post?
I just remember the enlisted club, and there was like a Fleet Reserve Association had a bar, and then I'm trying to think of any other like bars on that base. There
was one, a huge one, and then there's one like kind of on the water, and then one like in the middle, kind of by the tennis courts, like close to the necks. But
there's a bowling alley down that area too.
Yeah, right, like on top of that hill, there is that bowling alley.
Right. I worked on John Paul Jones Hill. I don't know if you remember that. Basically the tallest hill on the base.
I know exactly where. So when I was there, that was. TCN's Third Country Nationals lived in that building. If we're talking about the same one,
it was a small building at the top, and at the time it was fenced in because it was a classified facility. So, yeah. So
what kind of work did you do that you can talk about?
It was basically just communications. At the time, really focused in Gitmo was on messages. We would receive and send messages for the unit, right?
Okay. And were you like, how big was your team that did that? I mean, what were the hours?
So we were watchstanders. We worked like a rotating shift. We'd work 12-hour watches. There were 2 people on watch, a couple lance corporals, PFCs, right? So, and you would work like 2 day watches and then have time off, and then 2 mid watches, and then have, I think it was 248, 272 is what we called it. And so you were swinging back and forth between days and mids. And then, so there was, there were 4 watches, 2 people per watch, 8. And then plus there's like a comm chief and a couple of sergeants that, work days, normal hours kind of things.
So you started out as a private when you were there, and did you?
Yep. I went there as a private and got promoted to PFC. Marine Corps, I'm trying to think at the time, it was like 8 months after being a private for 8 months, and you automatically get promoted to PFC unless there's a problem, unless you're in trouble or something.
Mm-hmm. So you're in Cuba, private PFC. About how long were you in Cuba for?
I was in Cuba for 18 months. Right about 18 months was the tour. Yeah. And I picked up Lance Corporal there too.
Okay. So you pick up Lance Corporal, and what did your responsibilities change as far as, like, did you have like a leadership role?
Right. So I told, as I said, there was like 2 people per watch, one, usually low-ranking people. So, as you become a Lance Corporal, now you're the watch supervisor, right? So you're in charge of everything that happens on the watch.
Okay.
That kind of leadership.
And you're about how old at this time?
19, 20.
19, 20, and you're in a leadership role. That's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I definitely wasn't 21 yet.
Okay. As far as so you're there for 18 months, and that's I forget what you call it, but no families can come with you. That's like a tour without families.
No,
correct?
They actually. Well, I was single at the time, so I didn't have family with me. But there were people I worked with, not as like as a Lance Corporal, E3, but there were some of the sergeants and staff sergeants and above. They had dependents there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was for us. It was it was a deployment for us. So, so you're there for 18 months. You pick up Lance Corporal, and at what point do you find out that you're going to be moving or ETSing to a different location?
yeah, so I mean, it was getting near the time for my next duty station, and then I asked what my options were. It's funny because as a lance corporal, you can ask what your options are, and they say, okay, but this is where you're going to go, kind of thing. And so I got orders to Guam, and then I don't remember who told me, but they said you should ask if you can get a school en route. Like a follow-on school. Is that?
It should be fine.
Yeah. A follow-on school. And so I did. And I ended up, they sent me back to Pensacola, Florida for additional training. And I went to, first I went through tech control school. And then I went to ATST, Automated Telecommunications System Technician School. So I spent 6 months down in Pensacola, Florida. Each of the schools were 3 months long.
This was, what year was this?
So it was, let's see, 91, 92.
Okay.
Time frame.
Okay, so you go to the schools, and then you arrive in Guam.
Yep. As a matter of fact, I was in Guam from 92 to 94.
From 92 to 94. And,
Yep.
and what were you doing in Guam?
So another cryptologic support battalion. I was trying to think, that's Company C, I believe, if I remember right. And it was a Navy communications master station. So it was more communications, less of like messaging and stuff, more making sure the comms were up between out to the ships and to different locations. So I spent a lot of time doing tech control, making circuits were up, the comms out to the ships were up, supporting Indian Ocean Westpac area. So it was kind of like a joint Marine Navy command. So we had our company, but the command at where we worked at, the Naval Security Group, was made up of sailors and Marines.
So some of the things you did there could possibly save a life or save a Navy or Marine Corps asset. So let's talk about what crypto is.
Yep.
For anybody that's listening.
So crypto is just the encryption. So we protect our communications, right? We use crypto to cipher the communications so that our adversaries don't know what is being passed, right? Whether that's instructions or questions of guidance or different kind of communications. It's making sure it's protected from our adversaries, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, essentially that could save information from leaking to our, like you said, our adversaries, our enemy.
Yep.
So you're there for 4 years.
I was in Gitmo for 2 years.
2 years.
92 to 94, yep.
92 to 94. And then you're in Guam for...
No, I'm sorry. You're right. I was in Gitmo for 18 months. I was in Guam for 2 years.
Okay, so you're there for 2 years. You start out there as a lance corporal.
Yep.
And throughout your time there, were you promoted to...
Yep. I picked up corporal in Guam. Yeah. I was promoted to corporal in Guam.
Okay. Is there anybody that you were there that like had an impact on
So there are so many people like impact on me,
mm-hmm.
right? So there's so many people in every place that I've been that I've met Marines and other people that have had an impact on me. I mean, I always say, and I say it nowadays to people I work with or people I mentor or lead, you learn something from everybody,
mm-hmm.
right? So sometimes
Very
you
good
learn
point.
Good things from people, and sometimes you learn bad things from people that you don't want to emulate. So yeah, there was definitely some people that I'm friends with now today, right? That I was stationed, this is 92 to 94, like, especially with social media today, right? It's reopened the ability to make contact with people that you've known years ago. And, there's Marines that I was stationed in Guam with that, I talked to on social media, or, I've had opportunities to travel for work after the Marine Corps, and ended up in places where I'm like, oh gosh, I know someone here that I was stationed with someplace, right? Just it's over the years I've met so many people, right? Had the opportunity to meet so many people, some amazing people.
Yeah, definitely lasting relationships. Some of the things you do, like when you're in, you just like you would never have done it.
Yep.
If you weren't in.
Yep. When I was in Guam, so that was 93, right? Was Somalia, and I was augmented to. I went to Hawaii to. At the time, it was 1st Radio Battalion, and we were forming up a deployment to go to Somalia. And I was going to go support them because
that was 93.
93, yeah.
When was Black Hawk down?
It was in that same era,
okay.
Right? So they basically, we kept getting delayed, and then things started falling apart there, and they canceled the deployment and sent me back to Guam. So I spent like a month in Hawaii, preparing to go to Somalia, but then it never came to fruition. And then another deployment out of Guam, I went to Korea and did a couple months in Korea. I think that was my first time to Korea. I've been there a couple times, but spent some time sitting in a GP tent overlooking the DMZ.
Oh wow!
Yeah, cold. I went from Guam, and I spent the first 4 years in tropical weather, right? And all of a sudden, I was told that I was going to go to Guam or to Korea to support this deployment, and it was wintertime. I may owned one pair of long pants. I mean, besides my uniform, just like civvies, may owned a pair of jeans, but I never wore. I wore shorts every time. If I wasn't in uniform, you were in shorts because it was, the tropics.
Super
it's always
hot,
nice.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I call my parents and I'm like, I'm going in a month to Korea. Can you send me like some jeans and some long johns? And it's just it was cold, especially after living 4 years in the tropics.
And how long did you say you were in Korea?
That time it was just a couple of months. It was a short little deployment. I don't remember the exact. It wasn't very long.
So when you were there, everybody that I've ever spoken to that went to Korea, so there's like the eat dog. So did you eat any dog when you were there, or cats?
Not that I know of.
Okay,
but it's hard to say when you walk out of a bar at 10 o'clock or midnight in Korea after having a good time, and you see a vendor on the street selling meat on a stick. You never know what it is. So it wouldn't surprise me, but not on purpose. But you do see it there. You do see, it's definitely a different culture.
Yeah, that's I hear that more often than not from people who are in Korea. So you're on a couple month deployment in Korea. Then do you go back to Guam?
Yep. Then I went back to Guam. Matter of fact, I was either in Korea or right after I got back to Korea that I was starting to talk to, we called it the monitor, the guy that, was in charge of who goes where, right? That I had a conversation with him and said, what are my options? And he said, well, we have an opening in New Orleans. And I'm like, so I assumed like I'd been Gitmo, Guam. I figured I was going to go Okinawa or some other island somewhere. But he said New Orleans. I said, that's a thing, right? Like I can go to New Orleans, Louisiana. And at the time I was 22 by then. I'm like, yeah, sign me up. I'll go to New Orleans. That sounds like the great adventure for a 22-year-old, single Marine. Sounds like a great idea. And then I said, can I go to a school en route? And they're like, yeah, sure. So I went back to Pensacola, Florida for a couple of months to go to another school.
What school was that?
That was TAC Intel. It was a tactical intelligence communication system. It's a shipboard, ship-to-shore communication system.
Okay. So you go to school en route to New Orleans, and you arrive at New Orleans. And what year is it when you arrive at?
94. I was 94. New Orleans 94 to 97.
Okay, so 94 to 97. So that at this point you've had 5 active years then?
Yep. And don't know exactly when, but sometime after showing up there is when I was promoted to sergeant.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was an interesting tour because it's New Orleans. Like the barracks there is small to non-existent, so I was everybody that applied for it got BAH own right. So I lived out in town, and a couple of Marine friends. We rented a place out in town. Lived. We were there to support the Marine Corps Reserve. So I did a job. It was called SSO, Special Security Office. We took care of the reserve intel people's clearances. So like all the paperwork, make sure their clearances are good. And so that's what I did for 3 years down there.
And that probably kept you pretty busy.
Yeah. It was definitely an interesting tour. It was one of those tours where you wore Charlies or dress, service uniforms, not dress uniforms, but you didn't wear camis every day. You wore a service uniform, the green trousers, the tan shirt, every day but Thursdays. Thursdays because Marine Corps field day is on cleaning. Day is Thursday, field day, so you always wear camis on Thursday, but. But then again, we talked about earlier, the Marine Corps, you can't go out in town in camis. So, but we wore service Charlies every day. So we could go down to the French Quarter for lunch, right? Cause the French Quarter was, a run from the building where we worked at to the French Quarter and back was about a 3-mile run.
Oh, that's not too bad. That's really close.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you enjoyed your time quite a bit at New Orleans, then I take it.
Yep.
So at what point did you find out like where you're going next?
It's just it's like everything, right? You're getting about 6 months out from your time there. That tour is a 3-year tour. So at 2.5 years, you say, okay, let me start talking to the monitor proactively to try to get some input of where I'm going to go next. So, that was it. I called them up, said, what are my options? And, I ended up going to Iwakuni, Japan.
Where is that, like north, south?
South. It's about an hour from Hiroshima, or an hour by train. It's because we used to go to Hiroshima all the time. Like when we were on our days off, we'd take the train up. Because that was a big city.
So how long? So you go to Japan, and how long is the flight to Japan?
Forever. The only thing that's longer is to go from Okinawa to Thailand in the back of a C-130, sitting in cargo nets. That is forever and a day. But no, I don't remember. It's just like the exact time it took to get to to Iwakuni, Japan. It felt like it was a long time, and it's not a straight flight there either, right? Because you're flying, military air command. It was, you're flying to Seattle and then to Alaska, and then it's just it took more than a day to get there.
Yeah, I flew on I went from Fort Polk, which is Louisiana, to Hawaii, which is like halfway to Japan, I think, roughly. And that was forever. And I did that on a C-130 and a net seat. So
when I flew back from Guam, when I was done with my tour there, I flew via Japan. So I flew from Guam to Japan and then to the U.S.
Yeah, that's a long flight. A couple long flights.
Yeah.
So you arrive at Japan. What's your first? How do you feel when you get to Japan?
It was interesting, right? I come from a small town, small town of Michigan. My first two duty stations, Guam is really, it's an American territory, or first three. Guam is American territory. Guantanamo Bay it's a military base. You don't go out in town, so you don't really experience the culture. And then New Orleans, now all of a sudden I'm in a foreign country. It was interesting. It was kind of, the first thing they do, you spend like a week in like the receiving, and they take you through all your check-in stuff, but they also do like cultural things, let you know about Japan's. I remember, and I always tell my kids this now, they had us learn how to use chopsticks by passing around a bag of popcorn and making you pick up popcorn with chopsticks. Just
a good way to learn.
Yeah, it was interesting. But yeah, it was so interesting, right? It's a foreign country, a place I've never experienced before. I guess I had been to Korea, so I wasn't the first time I was in a foreign country. That was, but now I was, lived there it was a year-long tour.
Mm-hmm. So was there any, did you like try out any sushi? Like when?
Oh yeah, of course. I love sushi. So, yeah, I'll try anything once. So I whatever local dish or Japanese dish I was willing to try.
Mm-hmm. I've just heard that they've, like in Japan, they'll like you'll see it swimming, the next thing you know you're eating it.
I don't know if I ever seen that, but I just remember sushi go round. Well, that was from years later in Okinawa, but it was like a restaurant with like a treadmill that went around the whole restaurant, and in the middle was a sushi chef, and they would make it, and it was like a single piece on a plate, and then it would just go around the restaurant, and you'd be like, oh, that looks interesting. You grab the plate, and then when they're done, they come and count the plates, and they're color coded. Each plate, depending on color code, costs so much. But you could try different things that way.
Yeah, that would. I feel like that would never fly today.
They actually have one in like Novi.
Oh,
no,
really?
It's not called Sushi Go Round, but it's the concept of it. Yeah.
Yeah, with like COVID and everything, I think.
Yeah.
Like that would be
yeah.
It might make me nervous.
Well, and you have to realize too that we already talked about it with Korea, right? And different countries have different rules and way they deal with food, right? So it's definitely interesting. Interesting to experience.
So the one thing I saw stationed in Hawaii, they were Japanese, their culture, like they'll stand really close to you. Was that a thing when you were there? That's the one thing I remember about any Japanese tourists that I saw. Like as far as distance from you, they didn't have a concept of. It's like if they were
personal
really,
space.
Yeah, personal space.
I don't remember. I don't have a memory of that, whether that was a thing or not. That's funny. I remember years later having somebody that had a personal space issue, so to annoy them, I would just purposely stand because the one thing about the Marines, and I'm sure all branches of service like that, but the one thing about the Marines is you got to have thick skin, right? People
absolutely.
love to, and if they find something that you don't like, it's game on, right?
Yeah.
Generally it's done in good fun. It's a brotherhood, right? Everybody's just having that sibling rivalry.
Yeah. And you're in uniform, you're all brothers and sisters, and you're absolutely correct. They'll find something, they'll nitpick it. So at this point, when you're in Japan, you are a sergeant, correct?
Yep. I was a sergeant. I was at Detachment 3rd SSCT, which was Special Security Communications Team. So another one doing communications for the intel shop, right? So we made sure that the intel got their reports and could send messages, receive messages, whatever they needed. Yep.
And were you coaching, mentoring?
Yep. So at that time, we had watchstanders. There was the detachment NCOIC was a staff sergeant, and then I was basically the second person in the structure, and then we had a bunch of watchstanders. So I was he was the staff NCOIC, I was the NCOIC. So
okay, yeah, that's cool. So you're there. Did you have anybody that you mentored there that you communicate with still, or?
There are still, Marines that I knew there that, I can remember a few of them that years later, they've now retired, right? That I knew them through the rest of my career, and I retired in 2010, and they retired, years after that, but since then. So yeah, definitely, as I said before, there are so many people that you meet over the years that I've had the opportunity to keep in touch with.
Absolutely. So you've, at what point do you find out, 6 months out, where you're going to go next?
Yeah, basically, that was a year. Iwakuni was a year tour, and so at a certain point, you're like, okay, we're next, right? So, and then that's when I got orders to 2nd Radio Battalion at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you arrive at Camp Lejeune at, what's the date when you arrive at Camp Lejeune?
Let's see. So now we're looking about 1998. Yeah, I would say 98.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember what month, but
And where is Camp Lejeune, and what town is that in? And
Camp Lejeune is Jacksonville, North Carolina.
Jacksonville, North Carolina. At this point, your parents have sent you pants because it does get cold in North Carolina, right?
Yeah. So now, well, it got cold in Iwakuni, Japan, right?
Okay.
So it's southern Japan, but I went skiing a couple times, like MWR trips that would take you a couple hours away, and we'd go snow skiing.
Okay.
Or snowboarding.
So you had pants from there, so you're good when you get to North Carolina.
Yeah. So finally, the funny thing is, I had always been at a, even though I'd been augmented to places like the deployment to go to Somalia that never happened, or go to Korea, but I really hadn't been at a deploying unit, right? They had been, now I'm going to 2nd Radio Battalion, which is, a unit that you deploy, have the opportunity to deploy, go to the field. So doing where previously I'd done a lot of shore communications, hard sites. And the funny thing is, I mentioned earlier that I didn't want to be a nuke because I didn't want to work in the bottom of a submarine.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of my career working in the basement of a building with no windows. And you go in for
it's almost the same thing.
Yeah, you go in for a 12-hour watch. It's dark. You get done with 12 hours. You come out. It's dark. And so while I didn't want to do that in the Navy as a nuke, well, the life that I ended up kind of put me in that same scenario, right? So, but now I'm at 2nd Radio Battalion, where it's more tactical comm. So you're talking about, some level of messaging, radio communications, wire communications, telephone, SATCOM, learning all kinds of, new things. Spending a lot of time operating out of a tent instead of a building, right? A tent surrounded by, triple strand concertina wire.
And you're taking a field shower.
Taking a field shower. There's two things I've learned about the Marine Corps and field showers. There's two temperatures, Arctic or surface of the sun. And generally, there's a field shower in the Marine Corps does not find a medium. It's either one of the two, where you're freezing to death or you're losing a layer of skin because it's being roasted off. Right? I don't know what those guys do that would, And I'm not going to argue with them because I'd rather take a shower than not take a shower. But
did you have like one of the Aussie showers? I don't know if they call it the same thing as you fill it up and it was like in a canvas and it had like holes in it and you would unleash it.
I don't remember any of that. I remember a lot of like big water bladders, and then they would have like a GP tent with dividers kind of rigged up in them, and then they would have shower heads. And it'd be a big tent shower. That's what I mostly remember of field showers. Or you were places where there was no shower, and then if some people had the kind of Aussie bag thing, or baby wipes, right? The miracle cure, right?
Yeah, I definitely remember those. And I don't know if you guys call it pogey bait, or you figure out what you want in the field.
Yep, pogey bait. Or gee dunk is a term we use a lot. The same concept, snacks, right? So
gee dunk.
Yeah,
it's the first time I've heard that. Any other terms that you used when you were in the field?
Oh, the Marine Corps, a lot of our naval terms, ladder well and head for bathroom, and there's just, I don't know. The one that I that I had to learn, and my wife said I couldn't use anymore, was the Marine Corps loves to call your hands dick skinners, right? That's great until you have daughters and you say, hey, go wash your dick skinners. And your wife says, you can't say that to your daughters. And I say, okay, yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah. So there's always some fun terminology that you get from the military. As far as so jarhead, where does the term jarhead come from?
Let's take a quick break.
Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on donations from our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and would like to support our continued efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the donate button. Thank you.
I don't really know. I'm trying to think because the Marine Corps is big on tradition, and I know where leatherneck comes from. It's from the leather. The uniform had a leather collar, right?
Uh-huh.
But jarhead, I don't really know. My cousin was in the Navy, and he used to say this because Marines have big muscular bodies and tiny little heads that look like you can fit a jar over them. But I'm not really sure where the term jarhead came from.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember the movie.
Yeah, that jarhead. Yeah,
and obviously, some of your teammates at the Marine Corps League, like one of them, their emails jarhead.
Yep. Yeah, it's a very common term. Now I'm gonna have to look it up later because I'm trying to.
So then there's eating crayons. Why is it? Why do they say Marines eat crayons?
I don't remember that. No,
I think
it's a valid question. I don't remember that a lot in the Marine Corps. I feel like I've heard that more since I retired than I ever did when I was in the Marine Corps. That a bunch of crayon eaters. The not smart kid at the table, right? That's eating the crayons because he's not smart enough to color with them. I think is kind of the concept, but. Yeah, it's funny. It is funny, right? It's the thing with all the services, right?
Yeah.
While we're, a brotherhood of military members and veterans, we love to razz each other on our differences of our services, right?
Yep. But it's all fun. I agree with you. It's total fun. And you're right. I had never heard that until I became a recruiter, and the guy next to me was from the Marines, and he said, "Yeah, you want some crayons?" And I'm like, "Why'd you say that?" And then after that, then all these other Marines started talking about eating crayons, so I didn't know what it meant. But yeah, so from there, you're in North Carolina.
Yep.
You're an NCOIC. You're spending a lot of time in the field.
Yep. I got there as a sergeant. I was promoted to staff sergeant there at 2nd Rated Battalion. And actually, I got married there, right? So, my wife Deborah, and we got married when I was stationed at 2nd Rated Battalion.
And how did you guys meet?
We actually met online. Early days of AOL. She was from Sandusky, Ohio, Cedar Point, if you're familiar with Cedar Point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So as a kid, I have many fond memories of, family vacations to Cedar Point. And at one time we just started talking online about Cedar Point and, had started a conversation, and gosh, it was years, right?
What year was this when you guys met?
When we met first time in person was 98-ish. It was. I mean, we
still
started
dial up then.
Probably, yeah.
I think.
But we started talking when I was stationed in New Orleans.
Okay.
So we had talked online for like 3 years, like a long time, years. And then one time I was on leave and I was, Camp Lejeune, driving to Michigan. You go through Ohio. I was like, hey, you want to go to Cedar Point? And we went to Cedar Point, and then kind of sparked from there, right? I think at the time we were just friends, right? We were, I didn't have any intentions, right? It was just too far away. It was like, hey, you want to do this? And I don't know. But then when we met, and this sparked from there.
So you get married at Camp Lejeune.
Yep. Well, I got married in Ohio, but I was stationed at Camp Lejeune. She moved down like January of 2000. We got married in May of 2000.
Okay. And did you live in like base housing, or did you live off post, or?
So I was a staff sergeant at the time, and I rented a duplex there when she first moved down. And then after we got married, we ended up moving into base housing.
Okay. Was the base housing thumbs up, thumbs down?
So first off, it was staff housing, right? So I was a staff sergeant at the time. So I liked that house, right? Now, if I was an NCO, a corporal or a lance corporal, I may have had different opinions on the housing, but the staff NCO housing that I was in, it was pretty nice. I enjoyed it. It was me and our son Matt, at the time, and then my daughter Abigail was born.
What year was Matt born?
So Matt was from Deb's first marriage, and so he was my stepson, but my son, he was born in 1989.
1989?
Yep.
Okay, and then your daughter?
Abigail was born in 2002.
2002?
Yep. Yep. So I was stationed there at Camp Lejeune at 2nd Raven Battalion.
Camp Lejeune. So you were in Camp Lejeune for what? From what year to what?
So I was at Camp Lejeune for 6 years.
Is that a long time, or is that a long time for the Marine Corps?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So generally, a Marine Corps tour is 3 years. Like a stateside tour is 3 years. I was at Lejeune 6 years because I did a tour at 2nd Radio Battalion, and then as I was getting on that 3-year mark, I got orders to 2nd Marine Division, also at Camp Lejeune. So I just switched units, but I didn't have to move. It was kind of nice.
Yeah, that worked out pretty good.
So my daughter Abigail was born. So obviously September 11th. I was on, for our generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was in during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I was in Gitmo during that time period, but I didn't deploy to it. So 9/11, right, is probably the most impactful for us, right? So I was actually on the rifle range on Stone Bay during 9/11. And, when you go to the rifle range, we had phones at that time. They were like flip phones, old school.
Nextel.
Yeah. I mean, and but you couldn't take them on the range with you. So you turned them off and you put them in your ruck, and your ruck was staged somewhere while you were shooting. And so all day long we're shooting, but the roach coach, the truck that sells sandwiches and drinks and stuff comes around, and everybody would be huddling around this, hearing the radio, because like we didn't know what was going on, right? Because we're just on the range doing our qualification for the year, right? And trying to figure out what's going on from the news. I got back to my ruck at the end of the day of shooting and turned my phone on, and I don't remember exactly and how many, but it just seemed like I had hundreds, probably not that many, of missed messages, and
because text messages weren't around yet.
Yeah, just missed calls and messages from my wife, who was obviously at home freaking out. My wife, who was 5-6 months pregnant, right, with Abigail, our daughter, that was born in 2002, right? So she's like, are you coming home? Are you going to war? Like, she's sitting there watching the TV. She's pregnant, and and her husband's a Marine, and she doesn't know what's happening, right? What's happening with the world, right? With the United States, but also what's going to happen with me. She was freaking out.
And watching the news made it worse. It just over and over again, they just kept playing the planes hitting the towers,
And the way Stone Bay is the rifle range is at Stone Bay. And the way Stone Bay is at Lejeune is, we lived in base housing on the main part of Lejeune. Stone Bay is on the other side of the bay there, and you have to go off of Stone Bay and then come back onto Camp Lejeune proper to get home. And I remember at the end of the day, driving home, and they've got tanks and hardened Humvees with 50 cals like at the gate, and they're scrutinizing everybody coming through that gate. You had to prove that you lived on base, and that because they didn't know, was someone going to be impersonating a Marine trying to get on base to do something. I mean, it was crazy trying to get home that day because everything was so locked down.
Mm-hmm. And they would look underneath your car with a mirror. I remember that.
So we lived in base housing, and this is months or year after that, right? Getting on base, they would randomly select people to inspect their cars, right? It was real tight at first, but over time it kind of loosened up and it kind of became more random. My wife used to complain that every time she came on base by herself, that she would always get the random inspection. And I'm like, you realize these are like early 20s young male Marines standing in the gate, and here comes this cute little blonde driving through. Of course, they're pulling you over to talk to you and inspect your car.
That's funny. And so I worked in the gate, and that is 100% accurate. Yes. So 9/11 happens. Your daughter is born, and you're still at Lejeune. And at what point it's about 6 months out from you leaving Lejeune?
Yeah, before we move on to Lejeune. So I was, 9/11 happens. I was had left 2nd Raid Battalion. I was with 2nd Marine Division at that point when I was on the range and was firing. And I didn't deploy right away, right? But then September 11th, my daughter was born in February of 2002. And then the end of the year of 2002, I deployed, right? So then we formed up a joint task force, Horn of Africa. So we were formed up and floated out November-ish of 2002, left out of Morehead City on a ship, the USS Mount Whitney, to head to Horn of Africa for anti-terrorism missions, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, so back to Somalia, Djibouti. And so we floated across the Atlantic, which is interesting. I remember before we left, I took a Dramamine. So talk about getting seasick. And I put them in my gear, sea bag or my ruck or something. I couldn't find them. Well, I didn't know for sure if I was going to get seasick, so I wanted to take some. Luckily, I couldn't find them. I don't get seasick. I didn't get seasick, right? But man, going across the Atlantic, I swear about 2/3 of the Marines with us were in the berthing just getting sick. It was rough. It was a lot of seasick. And then into the, road to Spain, into the Med. We stopped in Malta. Never did find the Maltese Falcon. And then through the Suez Canal, which is a neat experience going through the Suez Canal on a ship. A little unnerving at that time, that era, right? Because you're talking post 9/11,
yep.
And we're going on an anti-terrorism mission, and some of those areas in the Suez Canal, the land is right there, right? You're on this big Navy ship, and there's not, someone could pull up to near the ship and shoot an RPG or some rocket at the ship. It's kind of weird, right? We obviously had helicopter patrols all around, and they were watching for stuff like that. But it's kind of weird going through the Suez Canal, especially at that time. And then we got into the Gulf of Aden off of Africa and spent months just cutting grid squares, as they say. Did go down to the Seychelles Islands, which is south of the equator. So I did Shellback, if you're familiar with that term at all.
What is Shellback?
So it's a Navy kind of thing, but it means you've been south of the equator, and it's a organized hazing ritual where anybody that's a shellback already is a shellback, and anybody that's not is a polywog. And they put you through a ritual of things, and at the end you become a shellback, and you're now a shellback, right? Organized hazing, right? Like low crawling through a trench of saved up dinner scraps. I remember, and the funny thing is, I was a staff sergeant at the time, so I was kind of, I'm not saying I was on the top half of the enlisted bracket, right? So most of my friends, other staff sergeants, were already Shellback, but I had never been. So like they would mess with me even more because like they were my friends, and that's just in the Marine Corps. That's what you do to your friends. You try to mess with them more. Yeah. So like I would get to a stage and then be like, "You didn't do that right. You need to go back and do it again." And I remember low crawling through this trough, and it was just trough of old slop. But first you had to bob for, kind of like bob for an apple, but it was green peppers, it was onions, and then you had to hold this thing in your mouth as you went through the trough. And the first time I had a green pepper, and it was okay. It didn't taste bad, but it was okay. The second time I bobbed, I actually got a onion, and that was smart because the stench of the onion overpowered the disgusting stench of the stuff you were crawling through. So it was like, I wish I would have got an onion the first time, because that's a smart, even you wouldn't think you want to hold an onion in your mouth like that. It was a smart move.
And so they do this ritual for anybody that...
Yeah, obviously you can refuse to do it, but it's just tradition, and tradition becoming a Shellback, right? So, and it means you've went south the equator.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So then we came back. That was a Christmas time of probably 2002 into 2003, and then we came back and spent a lot of time just doing grid squares off in the ocean off of Djibouti. Twice we stopped and did swim days, Steel Beach, where they stop the ship in the middle of the Gulf of Aden, and you get to jump off the side of a Navy ship into the water and go swimming, which is kind of cool. Like, who's
sharks? So
yeah, they had small boats out there looking, and people observing, looking for sharks, but no, there wasn't any around that day. But
yeah, I've seen it done, but I don't know if I could do it. But so you jumped in. How high were you when you jumped in?
It wasn't the main flight or the main deck. It was, I don't remember how. It wasn't that far. I remember when I was stationed in Guam, we used to go down to the ocean on like some of the cliffs and jump off the cliffs, and those were way higher than jumping off that Navy ship. So
yeah, Hawaii, I jumped off some rocks too.
Yeah. So we spent a bunch of months. I think we were totally at sea for about 6 months. And then as they were building a base in Djibouti, so I used to fly off the ship on a helicopter into Djibouti, Africa, Camp Lemonade, I think it's called. And then eventually when that was built up and ready for us, we transitioned to onto base. We left the ship and moved the Joint Task Force on the base, and I was there for another 3 months. I was there. I was gone for a total of about 9 months.
What year was that?
End of 92 or end of 2002 into 2003. So, my daughter was 9 months old when I left, right? And she learned to walk, and all those things that you do for the next 9 months, or into 1.5. That I was deployed for. So
you missed the first steps or some of the first things, and then you get back and they're running.
Yep.
So you get back, and what year do you come back? Or is there more? I'm sorry.
No, that was about it. The only thing I would say about Djibouti, Africa is like, it's a hot and miserable place, right? I don't know why. Yeah, if I was there, I'd just get up and start walking in one direction. If it wasn't for the fact that Africa is tribal and they're not nice to other tribes in some of those locations. It's a miserable place. It's hot, like birds falling out of the sky in the middle of the day because it's too hot, kind of hot. Yeah. But yeah, no, I came back summer of 2003. I came back to the U.S. And, my wife for the last 9 months had taken care of life at home, right? Taking care of the 2 kids and kept things rolling, amazing. I always say, military dependents, like spouses, like have maybe the hardest job in the Marine Corps and the military, because they don't know, I was deployed worrying about me. She was worried about me and taking care of life at home, right? She
hoping nothing happens to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. The things that they do, as a dependent, as a wife, just, while their while their spouse is deployed.
Yeah, that's a lot to take. And, like you come to work, and my wife's been 13 years now, and the amount of stuff she does.
Yeah.
You are absolutely correct. And they keep us together, right?
Yep, definitely.
And the family. So you come back and you get to see your daughter, and she's at this point running, and
yeah.
How does it feel when you come back?
Oh, it was great to be back. And maybe one of the roughest spots my wife and I had, honestly, because I came back to where I left off.
Mm-hmm.
Like I came back like nothing had changed. The world had continued to move at Camp Lejeune, and, she took care of everything now, instead of me, paying bills or, managing the checkbook or taking care of getting things done. Like, she had done that. And so I walked back in like, okay, well, just handed all this stuff back to me. And she's like, well, wait a minute, I've been doing this, right? And so, like, it was just a transition, right, that you don't think about, right? I was just ready to go back to the way life was 9 months ago when I stepped out the door. And she's like, life is different now, right? I've been having to keep things going for this time period, and it's, it's not the same it was. And it was a realization, right? It's just like life had changed.
I know, like, with a lot of couples, that when they leave and come back, they're, getting used to each other again.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, you have to transition back into the life that, that I thought was going to be exactly the same, but it wasn't for her. And I was fortunate. I didn't have like PTSD, and I hadn't seen some of the things that people in other places did, where they came back and struggled with that. I was fortunate. I didn't have any of that. So, but still, it was, it was something to manage through, right? To work together through, which we did, thankfully.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys had a rock solid marriage. That having that foundation's huge, and coming back. So you come back and you go back to work.
Yep. So I was still with 2nd Marine Division. Actually, I had been there 6 years, right? So I called up the monitor, the guy that gives you orders, and say, hey, I've been here a while. I'm not looking, I know I'm at the time where you're going to start cutting orders. I'm not looking to go anywhere. If you don't need me to move, I'm happy here at Lejeune. I'll stay here. And he said, well, I don't have any plans right now. So I didn't, I didn't think I was going anywhere. Then I got sent to the career course. So the Marine Corps career course is like the E6, the staff sergeant, course. And, about halfway through the career course, I get a email or a call from somebody in 29 Palms, California, and says, hey, you're my replacement. And I'm like, I'm not your replacement. I just talked to the monitor like a month and a half ago, and he said he wasn't going to move me right now. And he's like, no, you're my replacement. Message is on the board. And I'm like, so I look it up. I go back and I find out, and I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to 29 Palms, California.
So is that considered a bad location to be?
So going there, you hear these things about 29 Palms, California is in the middle of nowhere, right? It's the high desert, California, kind of Mojave Desert area. It's truly in the middle of nowhere. And so people in the Marine Corps, yeah, especially younger, single people, it's a horrible place to be, I would think. And then of course my wife hears from other families like 29 Palms, the place is horrible. And so she's like, why are we going there? What happened? Why are you getting sent there? And I'm like, well, it is what it is. And then, it wasn't GPSs weren't a thing then. So I just kind of looked at a map and kind of wrote out plans, and we drove from Lejeune to 29 Palms. And I came in kind of the back way into 29 Palms, and it was like hours of absolutely nothing.
But
sand and, mountains and tumbleweeds. Right. And so we pull into the town, 29 Palms, and we stop at the first restaurant we seen, which later I realized was the fanciest restaurant in town, Denny's, right? Like, I mean, that's what it is. And so we, once my wife stops crying after about an hour of saying, why are we here? What is this place? We go eat, get something to eat, and, check in. So now the interesting thing was I had been at 2nd Railway Battalion, which you were, and 2nd Marine Division, deploying in the field, getting back from the field, always on the go. Now I'm stationed at a base unit. So I worked for base comm and data directorate. So I was a non-deploying unit. I worked a, normal day job kind of thing there on the base. So
what year did you arrive at base? 29 Palms?
29 Palms, it would have been right after New Year's night, or 2004.
Okay,
yep.
So 2004?
Yep.
You arrive at 29 Palms?
29 Palms, California, yep. So me, the wife, and my oldest son, and my son and my oldest daughter at the time. Yep. We rented a place in Joshua Tree until we got into base housing, and then moved into base housing.
How far was that from?
It's a 20-minute drive, maybe. It's not that far. It's like the next town over.
Was it a better place to live than the base? Or?
No, definitely not a better place to live than base housing.
Now, did it have restaurants and bars?
No. Joshua Tree didn't really have barely anything. The next town over, which was Yucca Valley, it had a Walmart. Probably the worst Walmart I've ever seen in my time. So it had more stuff, but it wasn't great. Really, to get to civilization, you had to go to Palm Springs, which was about an hour away. And then, Palm Springs is, it's a pretty nice place, right? I mean, that's where
people retire at.
Yeah, people retire. So that was about an hour away.
So you're there, and you guys don't really like 29 Palms?
Well...
Or do you start to like
let me say, we went there like, what is this place? By the time we left there, we were, gosh, I miss that place. Right? It was... The base does so much for people that live there. Like, gosh, every quarter... I think they had a big festival, and they'd have country bands come in, and they'd do this big event on base, and they'd have, barbecue and big bands. They just always were doing stuff for the family there. MWR, yeah, stuff. There was no traffic in the place. It was just an easy life. It was hot, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, 29 Palms hot," and I'm like, no, 29 Palms is kind of hot, but Djibouti, Africa, that place is hot.
Not as hot as Djibouti.
Yeah. But, we had, the funny thing is, I always look at all the places I've been, and I had so much fun in every one of them, right? There were times that they were horrible, and there were times, but I have so many fond memories of all the places I've been. And 29 Palms, it was a great place for the family. And then, we ended up adopting my youngest daughter, Chloe. So, then now we have 3 kids.
Awesome. That's amazing. So you're there for, how long are you at 29 Palms for?
I was there, I think I was there about 3.5 years. then it was time for me to. I was a little longer than the normal 3-year tour. It was time for me to go, and so again, call up the monitor. What are my options? And he's like, you could go to Camp Pendleton in California, which is still California. I was done. I wanted to change from California, or you could go to Okinawa, Japan, for a 1-year unaccompanied tour. And so at the time we were adopting my daughter. Well, she was being born really. So I left when she was like 5 weeks old. Right. She had just came home. We adopted her when she was born. So she came home from the hospital 5 weeks later is when I left to go to Okinawa. But when we were just trying to decide where to go, if I was going to go to Camp Pendleton or Okinawa, really if I went to Pendleton, I was going to deploy for that much time or more, where I could go to Okinawa for a year unaccompanied, still be gone, but then have an opportunity to go somewhere else after that, maybe. And I think at the time we were like, let's do something besides California. So, so I ended up going to Okinawa for a year unaccompanied. Again, I left when my daughter was 5 weeks old. Chloe was 5 weeks old. I flew to Okinawa from California. My wife finished packing up everything, loaded her and the 3 kids, and drove all the way back to Ohio, where she's from, and she lived with her father for the year I was in Okinawa.
Were you able to come home and see them? Or?
Yeah, during the 1 year in Okinawa, I had ended up getting sent to a conference in California, and then I took a week of vacation on top of that. So then I flew from California back to Ohio for a few days. But then, yeah. So Chloe, when she was born, 5 weeks old, I pretty much for that whole first year of her life, I was gone.
Yeah, it's kind of hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you're in Japan, and you come back, and what happens?
Well, let's just say when I was in, before we move off of Japan, so I was in Okinawa, Japan this time. Previously, I had been Iwakuni, which is mainland Japan. Now I was at Camp Foster in Okinawa. And then from there, I had an opportunity. I deployed once because I was a gunny at the time. I was at E7 at the time and living in the staff barracks. And I just wanted to keep myself busy to make the year go faster, right? So I deployed to Korea for like a month, and then I deployed to Thailand, and so it seemed like, and then I know we went to the field a couple times there. It seemed like the year was a long year, but I just tried to keep busy. And an interesting thing too was by then the internet's becoming more prevalent, right? I shouldn't say that because I met my wife on dial-up years before, but I had a Vonage phone, like a voice over the internet phone, and I made it so it was a local number in Ohio, but because of the internet, it was a local call for my wife to call me because it went through the internet. So I was able to talk to my wife almost every day that I wasn't in the field, right? So that was kind of nice. It was a big change from previous deployments.
Yeah, getting a calling card and having to go to a payphone and wait in line.
I remember, and it was before I was married, but I remember the early years, calling my parents from Guam. I always remember it was $1 a minute.
It's crazy.
It was crazy, yeah. And then, Okinawa for a year, and then I got orders to Fort Meade, Maryland, to NSA. And so, after the year, so now you're talking 98, and I also got selected. So I went to Okinawa as a gunny, and I got selected for Mass Sergeant. I got promoted to Mass Sergeant as I was leaving Okinawa, heading to Fort Meade.
That's pretty hard to do in the Marines, right? To make E8.
Yeah. I mean, like any. It's based on your MOS, right? So there's lots of E1s, but as you work up to E8 and E9, there's less. At the time, there were E9s. In my MOS, there were 2 in the Marine Corps, 2 E9s, and there was probably 6 E8s. I think 6 or 7 at the time.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, that's not very many to get promoted that high.
Yeah.
So you get to you said Maryland.
Yep. Fort Meade, Maryland. Yeah.
And what year is this?
So that is 2008.
2008.
Yep. I was summer 2008.
And you're a master sergeant.
Yep.
And so you're going to Fort Meade, and what's your
Yeah, so I flew back to Ohio, picked up the wife and the kids, and drove to Fort Meade. So I was with Marine Cryptologic Support Battalion, supporting NSA, National Security Agency, and I was the senior listed advisor for a joint service communications team. So we would send small groups, 2 to 4 deployers wherever across the globe. To do communication support for NSA. So, but it was joint service. So I had, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines working for me. It was really interesting. I had worked, at naval security groups with Navy. So I was familiar with the way Navy things happen, and, and of course being a Marine. But now all of a sudden, I'm seeing Army and Air Force that I had never worked with, right? And just the difference in the way services, they're just different. So it was a very interesting opportunity to be the senior enlisted advisor for a joint service unit.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever any animosity between branches, or? No,
not animosity, rivalry, right? Like we already talked about that rivalry through the branches, but not animosity. I think they all work together. And I think I always laugh because the different services brought different things to the plate. And I always said, like, the Air Force guys are so smart. Like, potentiometer or something, I don't remember. Like, this Air Force, it was a staff sergeant, but in Air Force, that's E5. He's like, the potentiometer. I'm like, the what? What is that? And he like gives this long description, textbook description. I'm like, whatever. Those guys were so smart. They were trained so well. They knew things, but then the Marines, you could say, here's a pile of crap, make it communicate, and they would figure it out. Like, just the difference in the services. And I think they complemented, right? You could form a team that would work well together based on everybody's different skill sets and the way different service branches of the service challenged a problem. So it was definitely a good environment.
So you worked on a joint team, very good environment. And you said you retired in 2010?
Yep, 2010.
So this is 2008 when you got there?
Yep. So you have to do at least 2 years to get promoted, right? Or to change duty stations. They want it. There's a requirement to do so much time, right? So, but honestly, I didn't think I was going to retire yet. I ended up hurting my leg and I couldn't run anymore, and not being able to run in the Marine Corps is probably not a good combination, right? So At some point I just said, okay, it's time, I'm done. So I put in my retirement papers. Previous to that, I had thought about doing another tour, trying to go back to Camp Lejeune, back to 2nd Rated Battalion. But at that time, it was just like, okay, maybe it's time to hang up the boots.
So you made the decision then, because of your leg, and how did it transpire to you to write a letter and say, hey, I'm ready to retire?
Yeah, you have to you go to the company office and you submit your intent to retire paperwork or whatever it is, and then it gets approved, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can do that like 12 months out from your retirement date. So I don't remember how many months out I submitted. It was quite a few, but because I wanted to push it out to November of 20. I wanted to make sure I pushed out to November to get to the 21-year mark. And of course, you retire on the last day of the month, right? That's just the way it works. So I couldn't do November 7th. I couldn't do 21 days exactly. I had to do 21 days or 21 years exactly. I had to do 21 years and whatever 23 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it must be the same in every branch, because my branch was the same way.
Yeah.
So you drop your retirement letter. You get to that day. Do you have to like? Is there like a physical you got to do on the last day or?
The last day of my retirement?
Yes, I know. Like for us, it was like 6 months. We did
yeah. So I think that's about it. 6 months out or so, you start doing final physical and taps and the realization that I've got to start a new career, right? I gotta, while I am going to get my retirement money, it's not really what I can live off of with the wife and the kids. And right, so I got to start a new career and trying to find that. Thankfully, over the years, I had been going to college. I had a bachelor's degree. I had started a master's degree that I never finished, but I had already had a degree. Matter of fact, when I was deployed off the coast of Africa, I finished my associate's degree. And my wife got it in the mail. She took a photo of it and emailed me a photo and said, "Hey, you got your degree." And then I went on and did a bachelor's degree also. But, so I'm now getting ready to retire and doing the final physical and taps and applying to jobs. And, oh my gosh, I don't want to stay in the DC area. I want to move back to Michigan, Ohio. What am I going to do for my next career? It was stressful. It was nerve wracking to think where, we left camp. We left Fort Meade. I had like 45 days of terminal leave. I had a couple of interviews that I had done and was talking to a couple places back here in Michigan. I did not have a signed job offer yet. We didn't, so therefore we also didn't have a place rented. We stayed in my mother-in-law's kind of upstairs attic area. She had we lived there for a month, and then and I got a job with General Dynamics in Ypsilanti, and then we rented a place in Toledo for a year, right? So, but like rolling out of Fort Meade on terminal leave, it was scary. It was really scary. And
what was your thought when you signed? Like you signed like your last out, like you signed it. Like I remember I signed something and I left, and I remember like the feeling. Like what did you feel when you walked out of that?
Gosh, I think it was all over the map. I feel like, my retirement ceremony, signing out. Actually, one thing I do remember is like the day after my retirement ceremony, and I checked all the way out. We were just waiting to, move out of the house, base housing, and close on housing. I got a call that the alarms were going off at the compound, and because they had recall, and I said, That sucks. You gotta call somebody else because
it's not my problem.
I turned my badge in yesterday, but no, that final day of signing out, like you're excited, right? Like, what's the next adventure? Scared, like what am I doing next, right? Sad, right? Like I've spent my entire adult life being a Marine. All these amazing people that I've met and things I've done. Opportunities I've had, the opportunities my family have had, right? My wife and I often talk about not just the friends I've met as Marines, but the friends we have met, like living in base housing and the community of base housing, that you just don't experience the same after I retired and live in a subdevelopment. It's not the same. I thought it would be. That's why we moved into subdevelopment. But it's not the same. It's probably because they don't have the same struggles and concerns and deployments and all this stuff that creates such a bond with the families in base housing. It's different. You don't have that community. I mean, gosh, we still have friends in different locations that my wife is in constant contact with, or she went to Florida earlier this year and went and seen old friends from different places, right? It's amazing the community of a military base and base housing.
You feel like you had like an umbrella over you for like your whole career, and then all of a sudden that umbrella's gone.
Yeah no, definitely. And when I was deployed to Africa, my wife got sick, and our neighbors she was in the hospital. Our neighbors took care of our kids. Like because we don't have family there. This is Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. You know, I'm from Michigan. My wife's from Ohio. That's where our family is. My wife all of a sudden is in the hospital, and I got 2 little kids, right? So, I mean, that's just the military community taking care of people, taking care of each other.
Yeah, your family is the other Marine families.
Yeah, definitely.
So now that you are officially retired, what are you doing today?
Yeah, so I currently work as a security operations manager for a healthcare company. So for Meritive, I manage a cybersecurity team, helping to protect the company's data and our clients' data. So. And I'll say that I have these opportunities and these jobs because of the things I learned and the degree the Marine Corps helped me get, and the experiences and the training I got in the Marine Corps, right, have helped me get these jobs that I have had since I retired. Yep,
definitely. All the security, IT things you did while you were in definitely will help you. And you mentioned that you help veterans who are going through the process of either retiring or getting out. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm a mentor with an organization called American Corporate Partners, and I talked earlier about how scared I was, how nervous I was about separating from the Marine Corps, something I had done my entire adult life, and starting a new job in corporate America, and having that job and how to get that job. And so the opportunity came, 7 or 8 years ago, I think, to join American Corporate Partners as a mentor. And what I do is veterans, military members that are getting ready to get out of service, either after 4 years, or a lot of them that I deal with are retiring after 20 years, and are looking for that new career in either IT or cybersecurity. Usually they connect me with somebody. I mentor them for a year long commitment, and doing things like job hunting and resume writing and interviewing, and just talking about the transition to a new career outside of the military. And it's important to me because I think back of how scared I was, and I think to myself, if I could be that sounding board or that calming voice for somebody that's going through that same angst that I was when I was transitioning out of the military, like, I just want to try to help somebody else. Because I wish I had somebody that would have done that when I was so scared. But so it's great, and you get to meet some great military members and veterans, and help them go through that process, and then the excitement of that new career they start. So it's American Corporate Partners is a great opportunity that I've really enjoyed.
That's outstanding. And if there's anyone listening to this conversation, what would you want them to take away from it?
I think, I'll start with the military service is really an honor that everybody should think about. It's not for everybody, but if it is for you, right, you go into that service and you learn so much from it. You have so many opportunities. I've had a blessed life because of my military service. My family has had, we've had great opportunities. I've had great opportunities to do things, and I feel like I'm truly blessed. And I think part of that now is the importance of giving back, right? I've had a successful career. I've been able to do these things. There are people that are not that fortunate. And for me, it's a focus on veterans, because that's a cause that's important to me. It's important that we all find ways to give back. And I do things, we already talked about the American Corporate Partners, but I'm a member of the Marine Corps League. I'm a member of the American Legion Riders. We do things like Toys for Tots. We do military honors for funerals. We do, sponsor vets here in Livingston County when needful vets, if they need a helping hand. I try to do things to pay it back to some people that really need help, because I've had great opportunities and really have had a fortunate life. God has blessed me. The Marine Corps has given me an awesome career and raised me after my parents raised me. And I'm thankful for that. And I think it's important that we all take those opportunities to then repay back to others and pass it down, the good fortune down the road.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Veterans Archives, the podcast that brings you the story of the men and women who have created and lived our military history. If you or someone you know served in the military and would like to share your story with Veterans Archives, please go to www.veteransarchives.org, select the Apply Now button, and fill out our application, and someone will get right back with you. Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on the donations of our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and you support our efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the Donate button. Any donation is certainly appreciated. Look for Veterans Archives on your favorite social media. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Just look for Veterans Archives. Like, follow, and share our page. We'd certainly appreciate it. If you or someone you know is a veteran and you are struggling with mental health issues, please dial 988 and select option 1 for the Veterans Crisis Hotline. Please be sure to tune in next time for the next episode of Veterans Archives.